Hello. Today in my storytelling playlist, I'm going to tell you how I became a writer. Um, if you like anything you see here, you can like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. But this isn't going to be completely in depth, but it is going to be kind of the main pivotal moments and why I began writing. Um, I'm going to start with I've always been artistic. I've always made art and crafts and things like that. But when I was in my early 20s, there were sort of two things that I was most focused on. And one was oil painting, which I was going to community college classes to learn how to oil paint. So I was very focused on that, partly because my grandmother had given me a bunch of oil paints when she passed away, and I experimented a lot with them, and it got me kind of very interested in that. So that was one facet. And then the other facet was that I was in a kind of avant-garde noise band, rock band, and we had started making songs. And initially, the first band I was in, there was another guy that wrote songs, and I tried to write some songs. I don't know if they were any good, but I tried. Uh, and then eventually that band kind of broke up and it morphed into this other band. And then I kind of became the main songwriter, at least for part of it. And I shouldn't say songwriter, I should say lyricist, because I was the most musically deficient of all the people in the band. But I tended to focus more on the words, I guess. And I mean, I wouldn't say that they were good, but they kind of taught me a little bit about poetry and thinking in words in an abstract way. So those two kind of things were happening at the same time. And then, I made a lot of tapes, cassette tapes of these songs that I had, and I was also doing some on my own. And yeah, I just think the words, I wouldn't say they were more important than the music, because I liked making the music too. Although I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't very technically skilled in making it, but because I was creative, I could kind of come up with ways to get around the deficiencies in my skill. Um, if you know anything about Brian Eno, that's kind of how he was too. So I was pretty influenced by him. But eventually, um, I went through this kind of crisis, this spiritual crisis, and I quit the band and I kind of quit painting. Or I didn't quit painting, but painting became harder to do because I had moved into this small apartment and I didn't really have a lot of space. And the paintings that I did do, I started incorporating found elements into them. So a lot of these were like letters or words. So there became this kind of literary thing in the paintings. But eventually I kind of ran out of money and I was broke, and I would say, at one of the lowest parts of my life. And in that time, I started making these collages. And I think that's where the writing really comes from, because once I started making the collages, I started working more with symbols. And I think the symbols helped me see archetypes more. And then I realized I wanted to tell stories. And in the paintings, I wasn't really telling stories, but in these collages, I was. And then I started seeing the limitation of the images in telling stories, and that writing the stories, I could get into a deeper. It's kind of like I was struggling with these spiritual questions, and I couldn't really examine them correctly 2D. They had to be kind of um, more a combination of the person reading it and kind of having their own imagination fill in the blanks, let's say. So I eventually got interested in making books in this period because the collages, I wanted to tell these stories, and they ended up becoming more than one collage. And then I started thinking, well, maybe I need to do this as a book. But I had no skill in making a book, so I just struggled through that for a little while. But I would make these books from found objects and like write things and cut and glue them in, and eventually it made me realize I needed to go back to school, to college, and I went for book arts, and that's where I really embraced the writing. Just before that, I made my first, what I consider my first serious book, called The Hatchlings, and there's a video here if you want to see behind the scenes and how I made that. But I made that book, and it, I think it was about a person, but looking back now, I actually think it was more about Sophia, which is the sort of Gnostic idea of the feminine wisdom, let's say. And ever since then, that kind of idea has gone through my work, but that was kind of the nucleus. And then when I went to college, I got into, when you do it, you have to take these basic writing classes, but I wasn't interested in doing the assignments kind of the way that they asked me to do them. So often, if it was a simple assignment, I would tend to kind of overdo it. Not in a bad way, but I took them quite seriously. And so if it was an assignment about, write a description of your room, well, I might take that and make it into kind of a story about my room, right? So I would make it into something more. And I had several of these assignments with this writing teacher, and she was a good teacher, but she was quite young. I think maybe she was only 5 or 6 years older than me at the time. So yeah, she had a lot of knowledge, but she didn't really have what I needed, I think, to jump the writing to the next level. But then I met another teacher who was actually, that was his main focus, was writing. And when I met him, it kind of blew open the doors, because he had us do a few different assignments that were definitely more challenging than the assignments that she gave us. And they made me write some pretty important first kind of serious works, let's say, which some of it eventually went into my first novel. But once I had him as a teacher, then I knew that's what I wanted to do. When I first came to the school, I was thinking that I would be more about making objects and sort of artifacts with text in them. But after I took these writing classes, I realized that I wanted to actually make a story, like a real big story. And the artifact was still important, but it was kind of second to the vision I had in my head. And yeah, it just turned into this other thing. But what I should say is that those last 2 years of school is when I really honed my craft, I think, as a writer. And I wouldn't say that I was that good back then, but I was able to complete a novel in a short amount of time. And I don't think it was perfect, and even looking back on it now, I think it has some major flaws in it, but I do have kind of a love for it because it was the moment where, let's say, like, reality was forming me into who I would become. And a lot of this wasn't even conscious, like it was just kind of coming together. And I was just kind of a conduit trying to get it out as fast as possible. So I didn't even think that deeply about a lot of what it meant. But as it kept going and I kept refining it and getting it closer to what it needed to be, it was kind of like a fundamental shift. And I just realized that I want to be a writer. And so the sort of illustrations and artifact stuff kind of went to the back. And I still do those things, but I think the writing for me is more important. And then, after I finished school, I came to Korea. And while I was in Korea, I ended up writing a lot more. I've been writing pretty diligently since. And I do think I've gotten a lot better than what I was back then. But now I'm at the point where I'm trying to use it to kind of carve out or mine spiritual education, I guess. So whether the book is about A, B, or C, that's only the surface level investigation. If it's a book that's about a certain plot, yes, that's there, and I enjoy creating the plot as well, but it's the deeper questions that are inside the story that speak to me more, and it's a constant discovery because I'm finding more out about reality and also a spiritual reality and my own inner reality. All those things kind of combined. So I'm kind of losing myself in that now, I think, in a way, especially with the newest project I started. I think it's going to be quite interesting. I'm not going to say too much about it yet. I do have a blog post that I wrote a few weeks ago. I'll link it in the description if you want to see kind of what the project is, but I'm not going to get into it much here. Suffice it to say, I definitely see writing as more than just a craft. I think you have to do it as a craft to get better at it, but I also think that it's an investigation of life, basically. And the more that you do it, whether it's through writing stories or through journaling or through poetry, I think you learn a lot about who you are and your place kind of in this. So that's basically how I became a writer. I'm gonna probably do a video relatively soon about some poetry that I wrote, but I have 2 poetry books out now, but there's a third one that I'm pretty much complete with, but I haven't published it yet. So maybe once that's published, I will do a video on my poetry. I'm kind of waiting for that. But yeah, that's about all I got. If you like what you see here, you can do all the stuff like subscribe, hit the bell, and that's about it. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.